No, that stands for Ryan, eh? Little King?
Yeah.
Yeah. Little king, big king.
Ryan O'Neill is
So
actually.
what are we gonna do?
after.
Just speak louder? Oh, it's working now. How'd that work?
It's on.
All right. Oh, yeah.
Ready to go, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to call the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee meeting for March 3rd, 2022 to order, the time being 1:40 p.m. I'd ask for a roll call from the city clerk.
Certainly. Councilor Middleton Hope. Present. Councilor Parker. Here. Councilor Croson, pardon me, Deputy Mayor Croson. Councilor Palladino.
Present.
Excellent. Online, we have Councilor Carlson, several members of administration as well.
Okay, I'd like to start with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And we'll move now to adoption of the agenda. The agenda has been distributed. Are there any additions, deletions, or edits to the agenda? City Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the addition of item 6.1 for the closed session infrastructure services update, FOIP sections 18 and 24. That is 6.1 infrastructure services update, FOIP sections 18 and 24. Thank you.
Thank you. Be it resolved then that the agenda of the regular meeting of the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee of March 3rd, 2022 be adopted as amended. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Parker, move. And that's carried. Consent agenda. Previous minutes have been circulated as well on the consent agenda. If there are any questions, let me know. If not, be it resolved that the minutes of the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee held on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022 be approved and the chair and the city clerk designate be authorized to sign the same. Can I get a mover on that? Councillor Parker. All in favor? All right. Presentations. 4.1, Environment Lethbridge Update. I now call upon Kathleen Shepherd, Executive Director, to provide the Environment Lethbridge Update.
Great, Oki. Thank you for having me here today. I do have a presentation.
Sorry. I see that. A little bit of a technical delay here.
That's all right. It's nicer to have the technical delays in person for once. So.
There we go.
Perfect. That. So I'm here today to present our 3-year report to council. Normally we would do an annual report, but of course everything is a little out of kilter at the moment, and we do have some new faces that I haven't met yet, so I thought a 3-year report would be helpful in that regard as well. Next slide, please. Just a bit of background. Environment Lethbridge was formed in 2012 with a mission to inspire community action towards sustainability. We're a nonprofit organization, and we work in the community to help promote sustainability across a variety of areas. We've been funded by the city since 2015, and our current 4-year funding agreement is part of the city budget cycle and expires at the end of this year. Next slide. Over the past 3 years, we've been working on our 2018 to 21 strategic plan. There are 4 main focus areas within this plan: learning and action, public policy, knowledge and research, and operational stability. Next slide, please. I provided additional information in my package, but a few highlights from the past few years. From the learning and action area, Reuse Rendezvous is one of our programs that we took over from the city in 2015. Since that time, we have grown that program from having about 165 participating households to now seeing between 400 and 500 households every time we run the program. We always get asked how much does it divert from the landfill, and it's very difficult, as you can imagine, to get a quantifiable number on that. But we do estimate that each household probably diverts around 4 boxes of items from the landfill. So that is having an impact on things staying out of the waste stream. Next slide, please. One of our other programs that's focused on waste is our Wasteless program, and this is really intended to provide information and tips to people to help them reduce their waste before it gets to the point where it needs to be recycled or dealt with in other fashions. So in 2019, we launched a focus on food waste, and we followed that up last year with a focus on textile waste as 2 of the major waste streams that were not dealt with through the recycling blue bin pickup. So we have quite a good engagement on our website, and it really is intended to encourage people to think about what they can do before they need to throw items away in the garbage. Next slide, please. Moving to the energy efficiency side of things, our small business energy efficiency program is a program we ran with almost 50 small businesses throughout the community, where we worked with each of them to develop a plan to help them become more energy, water, and waste efficient in their businesses. Many of these businesses want to do the right thing, but they're not like a large corporation that has a person on staff to guide their environmental and sustainability initiatives. So we were able to help fill that gap and help them put plans in place to bring sustainability into their businesses. Next slide, please. On the public policy side, we really try to work in tandem with a number of the city departments and have worked on a number of different policy items over the past few years, including the Clean Energy Improvement Program. We work quite closely with waste and recycling, both on promoting good practices around curbside recycling and hopefully now with curbside organics coming online as well. And then we coordinate on public outreach efforts around things like Waste Reduction Week. We've also supported some of the community garden efforts in the city, and we provide input to a number of the different public planning initiatives, including the Municipal Development Plan. Next slide, please. On the knowledge and research side of the things, a big portion of our effort over the past couple of years has gone into climate adaptation. We hosted 8 different focus groups across a broad base of different themes, everything from economy to agriculture, natural ecosystems, disaster planning, to get a sense of where the gaps and barriers are in the city related to climate adaptation. So we have a report summarizing those findings that should be out later this month. Next slide, please. On the financial side of things, as I mentioned off the top, we do receive funding from the city. But over the past few years, we've raised over $800,000 for our initiatives. 210 of that has come from the City of Lethbridge, which means we're able to leverage the city contribution at a rate of $2.86 for every dollar that the city puts in. But just to sort of set the stage on that, that is true leveraging. We would not be able to bring in those additional dollars without that core funding from the city that allows us to match and access other funds. Next slide, please. Like every individual and every other organization, the past 2 years have definitely been challenging. We closed our public office in August of 2020, and staff have been working from home since then. And we've also had to modify most of our programs and events to be delivered online. And some of the initiatives that we were planning to participate in have been either delayed or canceled, such as the Alberta Summer Games and Team Lethbridge. Next slide. I do hope to come back at a future date and talk in more detail about some of our future priorities looking ahead to the next 4 years. We did just complete our new strategic plan, which sees us having 3 main focus areas going forward, which are waste reduction, green energy, and climate resilience. We've also been working with a project called Living Cities Canada, which is a national pilot program focused on bringing green infrastructure into different communities. We've been working with the Waste and Recycling team on the Circular Economy program. And we hope to be able to align some of our future priorities with the Municipal Development Plan going forward as well. Internally, we're focusing our internal efforts around diversifying our organization and increasing inclusion. Next slide, please. Any questions?
Are there any questions from the committee of Ms. Shepherd? Hearing. Sorry, John. Councillor Middleton, hold.
Thank you for the presentation. It was great. In terms of the language that you use, you refer to it as sustainability. Do you see yourselves more in terms of stewardship?
Well, that's a good question. I think we really see our role as providing information and encouraging people to take action. So when we get into terms like sustainability and stewardship, the words get really fuzzy depending on every person's individual interpretation. Like, I think if you asked everybody in this room, the definitions would probably all be different. But that's really the focus we have, is how can we encourage individuals, businesses to take those next steps.
I'm just thinking in terms of your strategic plan coming up, and sustainability gives the inference of maintenance, whereas stewardship provides for future looking, and I would hope that what you're looking for is to grow and to encourage more people in Lethbridge to participate.
Absolutely, yes. From that perspective, using the choice of those words, definitely stewardship.
I look forward to your next presentation then. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. I saw you were talking about textile waste, and I saw in your report that it takes something like 2,500 liters of water to make a T-shirt, and I saw something similar on blue jeans as well, but explain that to me.
Well, I don't know if I can give you all the technical nitty-gritty off the top of my head, but basically, as we know, a lot of our clothing, or most of our clothing, is not made locally, and intensive amounts of water go into every phase of the process, whether it's growing the fibers or manufacturing them or dyeing them, or the whole bit. So that's throughout the process. Obviously, you don't make one T-shirt at a time, but
it goes back to the water for the cotton, I guess, right at the beginning. And
absolutely.
Thank
yeah.
you. Further questions? Seeing none, I'll make a motion. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee receive the presentation and report for information, please. Make it. John? All in favor? Carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move to 4.2, Annual Sustainability Update. I now call upon Joel Sanchez, General Manager of Waste and Recycling, to provide the 2021 Annual Sustainability Report. Come.
Thank you. My name is Maddie Parker with the Sustainability Team, and we wanted to give you an update on an annual update on what the corporation's been working on over the past year. Our team is planned for the now, next, and later. First of all, I'd like to thank Caitlin Barr for authoring the report, and thank Caitlin and Jeff for collecting the initiative information from the various departments. Next slide, please. In terms of this presentation, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to our team and the annual report that you've received. From the report, we've identified 5 of the 2021 completed projects as highlights to share with you. A few of the things to discuss as well is the Partners for Climate Protection update and projects that our team will be working on now, next, and later, and what we're advocating for. Next slide, please. So the sustainability team has had a few changes over the past year in terms of personnel. We've been focusing our efforts on sustainability, air, waste, land, water, and energy. And we focus on the outcomes and return on investment when contemplating the initiatives and their priority. The annual report is a work in progress as we try to manage the delicate balance between reporting on the corporate initiatives as well as delivering on the initiatives with limited resources. Our team reached out to the various departments to collect their sustainability stories, and there are many activities and initiatives that have continued to promote sustainability throughout the organization. Next slide, please. So here are the 2021 highlights. The Energy Conservation Master Plan was put forward by the sustainability team. The Conservation Voltage Reduction Pilot was through the Lethbridge Electric Utility. The Municipal Development Plan was planning and design. The Improved Lighting Technology and the YMCA deconstruction was facility services. So I'll just give you a little highlight about each of the projects. The Energy Conservation Master Plan was created by Associated Engineering and the City of Lethbridge as a guide and best practices and initiatives for the corporation's energy reduction. The master plan looked at all departments within the organization to identify where potential excess energy was being used and where energy could be conserved. An initiative list was compiled for the implementation. The projects are both large and small, included in the implementation plan, such as tire pressure programs, solar projects, and conservation voltage reduction at our electrical substations. Some of the initiatives have already been addressed in the capital improvement program, but many new initiatives were introduced as well. Each department is responsible for their own energy conservation with the support of the sustainability team. Additionally, with the Energy Conservation Master Plan, a lessons learned component was created and shared for the community, and it has information graphics for the residents and commercial properties on how to reduce energy consumption. Next, we have the Conservation Voltage Reduction Pilot. Conservation voltage reduction is the intentional operation of the transmission and distribution system to provide customers with voltages in the lower end of the CSA-defined acceptable range. Traditionally, the voltage set point in distribution is set at a static value to guarantee the voltage received by the customers are maintained within that standard. Although it's an effective and reliable method in delivering power, it leaves much room for improvement and efficiency. Because of the static delivery, constant voltage is provided to customers regardless of their demand. This means that energy is wasted since electric consumption demands fluctuate based on factors such as time of day, weather, and the customer activity. The Lethbridge Electric Utility partnered with Alberta Innovates, Enercan, or the Natural Resources Canada, and Dominion Voltage Inc. on this pilot project, and the benefits were energy savings to the customers and the utility, peak power demand reductions, and energy conservation and greenhouse gas reductions. Next, we have the MDP. And in alignment with the requirements of the Municipal Government Act, the MDP was created during the course of 2 years and builds on multiple studies, strategies, and plans by administration over the past decade. the MDP carries forward the vision statement and outcomes established in the Combined Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, MDP, that was adopted in 2010, while making improvements through the addition of a more detailed, measurable policy direction and a more robust framework with performance measurements. And the MDP was set out for 6 desired outcomes for the City of Lethbridge and what they plan to realize. Next. Oh, no, not next. The next one is the improved lighting technology. And in recent years, the City of Lethbridge has been looking to update the lighting at 17 of its buildings. One was CASA, City Hall, and the police headquarters. I mean, there are others. Those were in the energy audits that was presented in 2020. The benefits of this program include the replacement of the existing light fixtures and more energy efficient fixtures, lighting control upgrades such as occupancy sensors, daylight sensors, or building management control systems. And recently, the City of Lethbridge introduced a new lighting replacement project at Henderson Ice Center that will yield an estimated annual greenhouse gas reduction of 27 tons and an estimated annual energy savings of 43,400 kilowatt hours. And this marks about a 10% decrease in the total energy use on the building. The project was made possible by a grant from the MCCAC, which is the Municipal Climate Change Action Plan, which covered about $56,000 of the $78,000 cost. And last, we have the deconstruction of the YMCA. The City of Lethbridge completed the deconstruction of the 60-year-old YMCA building in Civic Square. The city planned to divert 90% of the materials from the landfill through recycling, reusing, and repurposing of the materials. Before its deconstruction, many materials were salvaged, both large and small, such as bathroom fixtures, LED fixtures, pool pumps, wheelchair ramps, and they were all saved, sold, or donated to anybody that could use them. And the project was successful by diverting 98% of the materials from the landfill, far exceeding their target of 90%. Next slide, please. For a Partners for Climate Protection update, the target was set by Council in 2020 to reduce the corporate greenhouse gas emissions by 40% of the 2018 baseline by 2030. Currently, our GHG emissions have been reduced by 12.5%. However, if you see 2020 and 2021 up there, we kind of feel that COVID had a lot to do with this, with the closures, shutdowns, and reduced usage, as well as working from home had an impact on the facilities. We look forward to the gas collection system at the landfill coming online this year, which will provide another large reduction and will help us reduce our GHGs further. Next slide, please. Just a summary of the annual report that was provided to you. Here's a kind of a snapshot of the projects and kind of their themes that they were in. A lot of the projects have been completed, but there are quite a few that are planned or in progress in all 6 of the areas. Next slide, please. So what is the sustainability team currently working on? Implementing the initiatives that were in the Energy Conservation Master Plan, supporting fleet with the implementation of their administrative green fleet policy, circular procurement as part of the Circular Economy Project with the Recycle Council of Alberta, a corporate product diversion, City Hall Solar Carport Pilot Project, a department climate adaptation planning that came from the Climate Change Vulnerability and Risk Assessment that we did for our infrastructure, ICI Organics Program, and electric charging stations, and potentially some grant funding from MCCAC or the Civic grant for that. Next slide, please. Projects that are in the queue to deliver on, and there's a long list of projects here, so I'm not going to read them, but a couple of highlights would be reinstating the organics waste collection program at the corporate buildings, as well as expanding on the recycling and the organics programs to more civic buildings. The projects that have been approved in the CIP E11 for sustainability enhancements, and looking at what carbon credits mean to the organization and what can be done with them. Next slide, please. And after all of those are completed, we look to a community climate adaptation plan, which may be reprioritized given a new funding opportunity that was launched this week. An environmental sustainability master plan, and PCP milestone 3, that's the Partners for Climate Protection milestone 3, and that's the implementation plan to get us to our 40% reduction. We had planned for 20%, but we still need to fill the gap of the other 20%. Next slide, please. And for advocacy, we're continuing to push for renewable energy projects that make sense, strive for sustainable opportunities within the community and the corporation, and advocate for the formalization of sustainability in the day-to-day operations of the organization. Next slide, please. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Open it to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Yeah, are there any questions of the committee members of the presentation? Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Parker, for the presentation and update. Curious, when we talked about, or when you had the slide up that showed the baseline and then the 12.5% reduction, I think in 20 and 21, I was assuming COVID had played a part as well. Are we on track for the target?
With the results from COVID, I would say yes, but we kind of need a couple more normal years to be able to deliver on that, as well as deliver on the projects that we have in the queue.
Agreed. Thank you for that. And then further to that, if I can, Mr. Chair, Ms. Parker, the impact that COVID had, folks living or working from home, etc., maybe reductions in having to heat and light our buildings, etc. Is that something that going forward could be a recommendation or explored to continue that downward trend? And I know that would help the corporate emission side greatly, but it would also help the community emission side, lack of commuting, etc. Is that something that's on our radar to either continue with or explore continuing with?
So, Councillor Carlson, I can probably speak a little bit about that. Basically, what we have presented today is the results of the COVID, and you're right. I mean, working from home had an effect on this. I know definitely, I won't have an answer for today, but I know definitely is something that we will be looking for with ELT and human resources. There are other initiatives that are going on that take in consideration the work from home program. So it's definitely something that we will keep in mind for wherever recommendation is going to be presented.
One other thing to add to that too is we haven't done the community PCP data yet for 2020 or 2021, just based on a transportation modeling delay. So once we have that, we'll be able to see the impact on the community too, compared to the corporate.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Parker. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Having none, sorry, Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick one, Ms. Parker. In regards to, are we conducting ongoing analysis to determine whether there are comparators with other communities and what they're doing in terms of trying to reduce their emissions?
We do look at what other communities are doing, and part of the Energy Conservation Master Plan was to look at what other communities are doing to see what would be right for our municipality. We do look periodically, and we did when we were doing the baseline assessment to see what other targets communities had. But from a project-to-project basis, we haven't done that yet.
I think that answers that. That's good. Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Middleton Hope moves, be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council receive for information the 2021 Sustainability Annual Report. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. We'll move to item 4.3, off-leash parks. And I'd call upon Blair Richter, General Manager of Parks and Cemeteries, to provide a presentation on the off-leash parks.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, members of City Works SPC. Today we're here to talk about adding more off-leash areas to the City of Lethbridge. And before I get started, just want to acknowledge the team that supported this presentation today. Maintenance staff provided some insights into the information, and a lot of our mapping staff provided some maps and information and created the data to a significant extent. So thank you to that team for that. Next slide, please. So very quickly, while we're here, November of last year, council passed a resolution for administration to bring back options and adding more off-leash areas to the city of Lethbridge, and that's what we're here today to discuss. So next slide, please. So although the city has done some prior planning and to support this type of activity in the past, we don't actually have currently a formal off-leash strategy or plan in place right at the moment. The slide shows you, though, the existing off-leash areas that we do have. So we currently have 4 off-leash areas and a 5th one that's currently under development. So you can see the locations on the map there and the respective sizes of each of those off-leash areas. Next slide, please. So we started this process, we essentially broke it down into 4 stages. Stage 1 is really researching best practices from other municipalities, start thinking about some of those minimum requirements, and start identifying potential sites for potential future off-leash areas. Stage 2 is actually going out to the community and engaging with them. So is the public interested in doing this? Where would they like to see these kind of things, and really engage them and help us further refine that selection criteria to refine those locations moving forward. Stage 3 is to actually perform a targeted engagement. So once we start whittling locations down, actually talking to those neighborhoods a bit deeper, having longer conversations, and try to get a better understanding if people are actually in favor of these things, and have conversations around concerns they might have. And then step 4 is really that implementation phase. So implementing these parks, monitoring and evaluating the success. Also just wanted to make mention that we are currently developing a brand new parks master plan, and off-leash dog parks is something that we're going to be contemplating within that plan. So keep in mind that's going to be kind of running parallel as we go through this process. Next slide, please. So we've done a bit of research into best practices that other municipalities have followed. And although there aren't really any consistent standards out there, there are some similar approaches that we've kind of identified. So things around space. So how much space is actually required at the minimum level for dog parks? What locations do people prefer? In terms of accessibility, so how far are people willing to travel to go to these dog parks? How close is too close to neighborhoods and residences? Ongoing capital costs, of course. Access to parking. What types of amenities? So things like benches, garbage cans, pathways, and ongoing maintenance. So those are kind of some things that have been consistent across the research that we've done so far. Next slide, please. So as we go through this process, you kind of see this as kind of like the money slider to kind of dial here. You see, we can go as simple as declaring an area as off-leash, or we can go with the other extent, spend a bit more money, and actually develop more off-leash parks, right? So that's where you'd have fencing in place, potential pathways, dog toys, amenities, things like that. So we've kind of said, well, there's different levels that we can go, and we want to explore that and hopefully get a bit of direction from council through that. Next slide, please. So the preliminary site identification we've done is actually just the first step, just to kind of get a general sense of where these potential locations might be. And we've narrowed down to 77 potential locations. And what we did was we ran a query on sort of 2 main factors. One, we wanted to identify green space that has a minimum of 0.5 hectares available. And we wanted to provide at least a 15-meter buffer from adjacent neighborhoods or residences, property lines. And so we've got a preliminary 77 locations that we can start with. Next slide, please. So as we go into that stage 2 phase, we actually want to engage the community and get a better understanding on what their input into this process is, what they want out of these dog parks, and just some other interest things that can help us make that decision. So some of the items would be like, where in the city are you interested in having these dog parks? What size do you want to have these dog parks? Do you want to have parking? What sort of amenities and features do you want to have? Are people willing to volunteer to support some of these projects, like picking up dog waste, refilling doggy bags? and just get a general sense on what the concerns from the community are before we go too far down this road. So, next slide, please. Just the potential challenges, just to make council aware here, is that, you know, we're kind of going through some maintenance staff pressures at the moment, and we're not currently budgeted to support more off-leash areas at the moment. Now, that being said, we're not saying we can't do it, just want to be mindful as we go through this and focus on staff pressures that we have currently. Potential complaints from adjacent residents. They might complain about noise, so excessive barking. They might complain about the odor. Some folks might be resistant to adding these new parks next to their house. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when dogs are in dog parks and off-leash areas, they tend to chew up the turf pretty good. And that actually it impacts our staff. They have to shut the parks down a little bit, take care of the turf, and actually wait a bit of time so that turf can regenerate before opening them back up to more dogs. So just some challenges to keep in mind as we go through the process. So in terms of next steps, we've essentially done stage one. We've done some best practice review, identified some minimum requirements, and identified some potential sites. So that next stage we want to do is, as like I said, is engage the community, get a better understanding of what the public wants, what they don't want, and then use that to really drive the process moving forward. After we get some engagement results, like I said before, we'll sort of whittle down that list of locations a bit, and then look into that final phase of implementation and monitoring. And lastly, I just want to repeat myself on the Parks Master Plan that's currently happening. This is something we are reviewing during that process, so this is going to be a sort of a parallel process as we go through that activity there. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richter. Councillor Parker has a question.
Why do you laugh? It is my passion, actually, and it's a lot of people's passion. First of all, Mr. Richter, thank you to you and your team for your presentation, and I want to thank you as well because this is a resolution that I brought forward, I think at our first official council meeting, and thank you for coming back to the report. So I'm excited about this, and I appreciate you doing your due diligence. And first of all, a question and a few recommendations. So how are you going to get feedback from residents? How are you going about that?
Great question, Councillor Parker. Actually, we actually have a new position that's actually posted on the city's website, and we're actually going to develop this new role is actually going to help us engage the community. So we haven't gone through that process yet, but we're going to bring on a new person to help us. We have a strong communications engagement team to engage the community, and we have not at this stage developed that process yet.
The reason why I'm just thinking sometimes we overthink this stuff, and I'm thinking there's probably 5 or 6 places where you can buy dog food in the city and supplies, and that's usually a good place to grab people's ears because those are the people that usually don't have dogs don't have as much care, but people who are dogs, if they do have dogs, they're very passionate. The big thing that I was hoping for is, I think we have lots of areas, widespread areas, but I'm thinking more localized, and I think because there's a lot of people who are maybe challenged mobility-wise and all that, and remember, it's just not about dogs, it's about humans interacting among humans, and usually a lot of people meet a lot of people through their dogs. And so I'm thinking, are we overthinking this? Or are we just, I know we have a big picture plan, but is there a possibility in the next few months to just do possibly a little trial area, just put up a little fence? And I understand what you're saying in regards to the wear and tear, because Councillor Carlson, and I can recall when we first opened up the Riverstone Park, how successful it was, and if things are not seated well and grounded well, those dogs and traction and moisture can cause havoc. So obviously that was a good trial area to find out where we were successful and if we were to do it again differently. Is there a way of doing something like within the next 6 months, or are we thinking 2 years from now?
Well, to be honest, Councillor Parker, this is where direction from yourself would be great. And if this is something you want us to pursue right away, we can definitely do that right away. Just a word of caution, like the Riverstone Dog Park was a success because that was actually constructed before a lot of the houses went in. So residents buying in, they knew there was a dog park right there. They knew what to expect. So I'd appreciate there's a lot of people who are in favor of dog parks, but there's probably going to be a lot of people that are opposed. And until we do that engagement, it's hard to really get a good understanding of what people want and where they want these dog parks.
And my last question, well, not a question, more of a opinion is, using the dog parks I have, usually they're not a noise issue, actually. They're usually not, dogs are not that loud. Usually you have the odd dog that's a little louder. It's usually the kids running around the dog park that are louder than the dogs themselves. So noise wouldn't be an issue, and I think a good place to do is talk to the people in that area, that live in that area. That's because you have a good sense of the people that live there. And second of all, I think the idea of volunteerism is a great idea. I think not only in regards to picking up feces, but taking care of the weeds that get caught in the rocks and all that. And I know we're undermanned in certain areas or under personnel. So I think most people would volunteer, and I think signage where it says volunteer would be greatly appreciated. So little things like that, but I liked where the report's at, and I appreciate looking forward to the follow-up report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have a question from Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Richter, for this. I think Councillor Park and I are very much on the same page. I think most of your comments and my questions are the same. Mr. Richter, following up on Councillor Parker's thoughts about smaller ones. I love the big parks, don't get me wrong. They're lovely. You can spend all day there if you so desire. But I go to many communities, one in particular, our sister city, Saint Laurent, and they have been putting small dog parks, just off-leash areas, in every one of their parks, and they are a huge hit. And I think just another comment on Councillor Parker about the noise. I agree. The dogs are in the parks already. I think what would be nice if there was a place that they could actually be a bit more contained. It may even help with some of the owners that don't pick up after their pets. I'll put it that way. And so I'm wondering if that's a thought. Like when I looked at the map, and I think you said there's 70 plus locations. I was a bit shocked that there's only one dot anywhere near Henderson Lake. That seems to me like a spot that could have multiple smaller areas for dogs. Anyways, just I guess I'm just asking for your thoughts on these smaller. I mean, they don't have to be large. In Coeur d'Alene, I was just there, and their little spots in their parks are maybe 50 feet by 10 feet, if that. So just your thoughts on those smaller amenities.
Yeah, that is definitely something we can explore. And I know the city of Calgary, I think their approach is that every couple of years, they just designate a park as off-leash. They don't put up any fencing, and they rotate these things every couple of years. And that's an approach we definitely could take. Going back to your comment about, installing some fencing, there's probably some opportunities to do that, but there is a cost associated with doing that work. And there is a bit of extra maintenance. Just be mindful of that. But if that's the direction that this council wants to go, we can definitely explore that in a more of an expedient fashion, if that's the direction.
Okay, thank you for that. And just, if I can, Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question. On Mayor McGrath Drive at 3rd Avenue, just south of the water tower, there's a property there. It's owned by the city. I know. I think it's either a reservoir or a pumping station. It's already fenced in. And I notice there's no dot there. I'm wondering if there's been any thoughts of utilizing these spaces that already exist and may already be fenced, and that's a fairly cheap way to go. Have those types of sites been looked at?
Yeah, so the map you're seeing today is we just ran a query, like I said, on existing green space, 15-meter setbacks from residences, and at least 0.5 hectares. So it sounds like what you're saying, Councillor Carlson, is look at areas that are even smaller, and that would really create that list of options even larger for what we're doing. So we can explore smaller areas, which should add more dots to that map that you see right now.
I'd appreciate seeing that. If you can find a site that's already in use, fenced and maintained that we own, that's an easy fix for me. Anyways, just my 2 cents there. Thank you.
Councillor Parker.
Councillor Milton Hope's ahead of me, isn't he? No. Okay.
Took it off.
And I don't want to piggyback on Jeff, but good points there, Jeff. Question for you. When we, didn't we designate an area, maybe I can't remember, but isn't there an area in the north side, the old landfill substation, that area? Isn't that designated to be a dog park?
So we're constructing a new bark park around that area right now. Yeah, it's right across from the, if we're talking about the same thing, it's right across from the north side recycling depot. There's one, it's under construction currently, and the anticipated completion date is this summer, actually.
What would be a good idea, and it's a good news story, and if you don't tell our story, someone else will, and I think we have to do a better job, is maybe we should put some kind of signage up there, future dog park, you know, because quite often people got frustrated knowing that we're putting disc golf down the river bottom. There's a lot of pushback. If we had a sign up there saying future dog park, people go, hey, it makes sense, it's good. So those are good news stories, and sometimes we have to wait until it gets done, but just a suggestion, and I what do you need from council to accelerate this?
Well, I guess, you know, that's a good question. What, is it a formal resolution with a kind of a strict deadline? I mean, what?
Well, that doesn't need to be written today. And this committee is just set up to kind of filter, kind of go through, and then we as a committee or any member of council, including Councillor Carlson, can actually bring a resolution forward at a future council meeting. But is it resources, or you just need a directional resolution to accelerate it?
It's not resources. It's more just that formal direction on what exactly you want and when you want it.
Perfect. And I also understand and appreciate that there is a process that we have to follow here out of respect to the community. So, and I appreciate that process that you put forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No further questions. I have a motion by Councillor Parker. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council receive the presentation and report as information. Call for the question.
Oh, just question. Since it's my resolution, I get to speak to it. So I just want to thank Mr. Richter and his team and Infrastructure Services. I know I brought this resolution first we got elected, but I'm glad that we've had such positive progress, and I just want to thank you and your team for what you've done to date. Thank you. And I call the question.
All in favor?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Carlson.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I did have my hand up, but the screen is small. I'm just wondering, I know the resolution has been voted for. I'm wondering if there'd be any interest at this committee level in actually putting forward some of the thoughts that were expressed to the committee, that smaller sites be examined as well, or is that can that be amended maybe at council?
Well, what I was just going to say to you is, as I was saying, there's any member of council, wink, wink, can bring a resolution forward to a council meeting. So it doesn't need to be a directional resolution. I think we've accepted a report, and I think I will be crafting one for a future council meeting, and I will bounce that off my colleagues as well. Maybe as an OBR, maybe a notice of motion, either way.
Excellent. Thank you.
All in favor? Moving along to 4.4, ICI and construction and demolition sectors waste diversion implementation strategy 2021 annual report. I would call upon Joel Sanchez, General Manager, Waste and Recycling, to provide a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of Civic Works SPC. Today we're here to talk to do the annual report on the ICI and C&D strategy, and we're going to be going through the updates and the achievements that we have been able to accomplish with this implementation. And next slide, please. So we're going to be going through the strategy itself and highlighting some of the areas where we have been working over the last 5 years. Surcharges, the annual update in terms of the results, and the next steps that we have. Next slide, please. Before we start, I just want to do an introduction today of Felipe Pereira de Albuquerque. Felipe started with the Waste and Recycling Utility last year, and he will be in charge of the implementation of the ICI strategy, and also on the C&D side, supporting business and making sure that we communicate and engage with those businesses. that are going to be part of the next steps, such as mandatory recycling and a mandatory organics program. Felipe has an environmental engineering degree and will be, as I mentioned before, leading all the ICI and CND waste initiatives. And next slide, please. So I wanted to do a quick update or refresh on council where the strategy started. The ICI waste diversion strategy started in 2015 when City Council approved the waste diversion policy. This policy has the targets that you have in front of you, and it basically sets the diversion or the waste reduction for each one of the areas, not only the ICI and CND, but also the residential. Over the last 5 years, we have been implementing different approach or programs. Some of those were voluntary programs, others were regulatory programs, and also the economic incentives. Felipe is going to explain a little bit later the results of the implementation of these programs. But again, I just wanted to make sure we know that this has been a long journey, that since the approval from City Council in 2015, we have been working in different steps. And we are happy to report some good results today. So with that, I'm just going to ask Felipe to continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Joe, members of the committee, Mr. Chair. Next slide, please. So in this first slide, we have the schedule that was first approved. It has the 2021 year highlighted. We can also see here that the increase in the tipping fees reached its cap in 2020, which was $115 per ton. It was capped in 2021 and also now in 2022. With the COVID, some of the implementation strategy actually suffers some delays. And at the end of this presentation, I will be showing another schedule that will reflect those changes. Next slide, please. And this picture, you can see an area at the Waste and Recycling Center with some structures that were put in place to support the waste and the waste diversion for the C&D sector. So here, as we can see, we have an area dedicated for shingles, another one for drywall, and also for other materials. Next slide, please. Regarding the ICI, we also had some progress, like a lot of progress, to be honest. But we understand with the relaunch of the mandatory recycling and with the organic diversions, new opportunities will be created for this sector to achieve results as good as the C&D ones. And also, we know that the ICI downtown clients, after 2 years of the strategy implementation, still don't have a solution for their recyclables. And we understand that tackling this issue will also contribute for the ICI results. Next slide, please. So about the surcharges, as was already reported here before, it started in 2019, but the enforcement started in 2020, allowing some time for the business to adapt it. And the designated materials so far are those in the screen right now. Next slide, please. So here we have an example of 2 loads that were actually surcharged last year. As we can see here, they have much more than 25% of those designated materials, and this is exactly what we want to avoid, right? So last year we have an average of 285 inspections per month, which was 37% more than 2020. Next slide, please. Here, just an overview of the surcharges throughout 2021. We see here that we had an average of just under 29 surcharges per month during 2021. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we start to dive a little bit deeper in the sectors. Starting with the ICI sector, we have here performance of the sector throughout the last 9 years. We can see here a firm decrease in the amount of waste generated by this sector since 2019, especially that was when MRF became operational. And we have here for 2021 a number that is that's really a reason for celebration to us. That is, the generation of waste for the ICI sector in 2021 was 428 kilograms per capita, which is just below the 430 kilograms per capita for the target for 2021. So this is a number that is 3% lower than 2020. And one of the reasons that we believe that make possible for us to achieve this good number was the increased volume of cardboard that we have been receiving at City Smurf since 2020. Next slide, please. Here we can see the performance of the C&D sector. This is really a sector that has been showing an outstanding performance since the beginning of the strategy. We can see here that in 2015, the first year of the strategy implementation, this sector already achieved the target that was supposed to be achieved until last year, until 2021. And the end goal target, the target for 2030, was achieved in 2016. Actually, not only achieved in 2016, but since 2016, the sector never generated more than 130 kilograms per capita. What's really a very good result. We can see that in 2021, we have a slight increase of 8% in the waste compared to 2020, but this is not a reason for concern. As we can see, still is quite below 2030 target, and it's normal to have some fluctuation as the economy recover and more constructions are performed. The reasons for that are the success of the differential tipping fees, and also here we can start thinking if we maybe should adjust those targets for more ambitious one, as this result has been so good so far. Next slide, please. This is another metric that we start presenting in the annual report of 2019 that just correlate the amount of waste per construction permits. So here the bars will represent the number of permits per year, while the line is representing the amount of waste per permit. So again, since 2016, it has remained below 90 tons per permit. Next slide, please. In this slide, we are doing a combination of all the non-residential waste together, ICI and C&D. This is important because many times C&D waste, C&D bin, come to the landfill as an ICI, so it's important to do this evaluation to have a more realistic picture. So here we can see that in 2021, we stay 14% below the target for that year, for 2021. Nevertheless, we can see relative stagnation between 20 and 2021. That is a sign for us that we indeed need to move on with the regulatory measures, with the mandatory recycling, and with the organic solution. Next slide, please. Here, just another metrics as well. We are comparing the amount of waste generated per year with the amount of recyclables. So the bars are representing the garbage, the tons of garbage per year, while the line is representing the amount of recyclables per year. We can see here two very important moments that were in 2016 when the differential tipping fees became in effect. So a steep increase in the recyclables from the C&D sector, and in 2019, when the MRF became operational, we can see another tendency of increase of the amount of the recyclables per year. Next slide, please. In this next slide is just a moment for us to really look a little bit back our achievements and celebrate what this strategy was able to achieve so far. Even with all the drawbacks that COVID caused to the strategy, with the mandatory recycling program put on hold, with the organic solutions delay, we still could achieve the 2021 target for the ICI sector. So it really brought to the department this feeling of that accomplished, and it's really a moment for us to celebrate and to just give kind of a stamp of quality for this strategy. Next slide, please. Coming to the end of my presentation. I'm just showing some of the success stories that were developed last year. The first of them was the crushed glass project, which was an initiative developed between the Waste and Recycling and the Transport Department, and that was able to use the glass accumulated for the last 6 years to build 5 kilometers of pathways, which was the pathway adjacent to the east side of the Métis Trail. And for this pathway was utilized 15% of crushed glass as granular base. It was the first time of this kind of environmentally friendly solution was developed here in Lethbridge, and further studies can probably lead to more solutions like that, more alternatives like that to be developed as well. Next slide, please. Another success story that also has been told since last year is the drywall, the partnership that Waste and Recycling has established with some local farms that are receiving our recyclable drywall to use as alternative cattle bed material. So after the drywall is utilized as this bedding material at feedlots, the mixture of this drywall with urine, with manure, with other waste materials is composted. And the interesting part here is that the gypsum from the drywall can actually improve the soil structure, can buffer pH and add nutrients such as sulfur, which are especially critical for common crops as canola seed. Next slide, please. Some other success stories that were developed last year. Concrete was another material that was very successfully recyclable last year. Locally at the Waste and Recycling Center, huge amounts of concrete were utilized in roads, in pavement, and for the construction of the new hydrovac waste facility, that is this one in the picture. Actually, the hydrovac waste facility itself is another success story. It's the first of its kind in the Lethbridge region, and it's an option for hydrovac business to properly dispose of the hydrovac waste following all Alberta Environment and Parks requirements. And besides that, some other materials were also recyclable and sold for utilization in some private projects last year. Next slide, please. Here, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, we have this updated implementation strategy that will reflect the delays that were caused by the COVID. So here we can see that the mandatory recycling is forecast to be relaunched now in 2022, also with the announcement of the organic solution. Next slide, please. For the next steps, as I mentioned before, we are working in our organic program, and we are also developing a program to recycle the asphalt shingles that we receive at the Waste and Recycling Center, and hopefully next year I'll be here telling more about this project as well. Next slide, please. So that was basically everything that I had to present today. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I was going to ask if there are any pre-registered guests, or Mr. Eichel is a pre-registered guest on this particular item, if he would come up and do his presentation before questioning.
Okay.
But I don't see him in the gallery, so I guess we'll just proceed with questioning then. Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Chair. I have just a couple of questions. The first one is in regards to, you indicated that there are challenges to dispose of recyclables, particularly cardboards and those kinds of things, and I've heard from Mr. Sanchez before, we've got a truck convoy going out to Seattle to get rid of some of these materials. What kinds of solutions do we have to perhaps better manage this going forward?
For cardboard?
Oh, you indicated that there are challenges with recyclables, so let's pick cardboard if that's the issue.
Yeah, like the challenges that I mentioned actually was more for the downtown customers. We know that the downtown customers are facing challenges in hiring haulers interested in collecting their recyclables, and this is an issue that has been happening since the start of the strategy implementation. Maybe Joe has something else to add for that point, Joe?
Yes, just to expand a little bit on that topic. When the recycling program was implemented, the agreement was that the city was not going to provide a service for the ICI sector, since at the time there were private recyclers doing some of the work. So we left that area for the private recyclers to provide a service. And the reality is that some of the customers in the downtown area, they haven't been able to secure private companies to provide a service. One of the main reasons is sometimes in downtown, space is very limited, and in the alleys, they only have a cart. They don't have a bin. And private haulers, typically, they go for big bins on the overhead trucks. So there will be an opportunity where we're going to come back to council and probably present the rationale to go back and provide this service, especially for existing customers. Right now, we have some customers that we do collection for the black car. They have a 360 bin, but we are not able to provide a service for the recycling. So we're going to come back and present that option and see if we can help them to divert those materials from the landfill.
Does that require you to modify vehicles or have different types of vehicles? You can use the existing fleet?
Yes, the existing fleet, what we use in the downtown area is a rear load. Again, for the same reason, those are tied alleys. So we have a staff, we have the truck, we have the equipment and the staff to provide a service. It's just a matter to go ahead and now be able to service those customers.
My second question is in regards to the drywall recycling that you mentioned. Is that material that is produced as a result of the combination of biodegradable materials as well as the drywall, is that being sold?
This is being utilized in a local farm. So this local farm, the feedlot, they receive the material, they use as bad material, and then they compost the material. So it's not the city that has been doing this composting, but it's the farm, and they utilize locally then in the farm.
So it's a singular example as opposed to perhaps more widespread?
That's correct, and I can expand a little bit on that. This was a pilot that we did with one particular farmer that we wanted to see that opportunity exist. So we work with them in order to provide a drywall that has been received from the C&D sector. And he actually has seen good results. So we are in the process to not only talk to him, but as you know, Lethbridge is home for many farms and many cattle and feedlots. So the opportunity exists in order to expand this. And we also have been talking to the Recycling Council of Alberta also, because this is a good opportunity for, again, best practices. We are doing something that hasn't been done in the past, and the idea is to see if we can spread the word and have this going in other places as well.
Thank you. And last is in regards to the tipping fees. I noticed that there has not been a change in the tipping fees for some time and projected through to 2025. Why is that?
So the answer to that, the tipping fees originally when the strategy was approved was $65 a ton. And every year after 2016, that tipping fee was increased $10. Right now we are at $115, and that's a number that we believe is the right number. When we do the benchmark and we compare to other communities, Calgary, Red Deer, and Medicine Hat, their tipping fees are typically between $100 and $115. Anything higher than that threshold, then is going to be really promoting what we call waste export. So then the waste can go somewhere else, and that's something we want to avoid. We want to make sure we divert. We don't want to see the waste generated here in the city going to another landfill, because then the effect is gone.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Pereira. A question around the surcharges that were imposed. Is that an alarming number to you, that at least 10% of folks are trying to bypass the system?
I can probably answer that. I don't think it's an alarming number. Again, we go back and we talk to other communities. The city of Calgary implemented this probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they have a similar number. They are somewhere between 10 to 20% is what they have of loads that are being surcharged. On the other hand, we see this as a good number, because the majority of the customers are actually doing the right thing. And again, if you remember the graph that Felipe had there, we do on a month regularly around 250, 280 inspections. Only 28 inspections are surcharge. Again, the majority of the customers are working on this. It's also important to mention that when this strategy was implemented, we had a 6-month trial period where we actually informed the customers, well, we did an inspection on your load, and if the surcharges were in effect, you will be paying this. So it was mostly an educational exercise to make sure we let them know this is what we want to do. And Felipe will be one resort that we try to get him going to businesses in town in order to help them to find ways to prepare better for this type of economic incentives.
Thank you for that. And maybe just a quick supplemental to that, Mr. Pereira, Mr. Sanchez, 285 inspections a month. Out of how many loads would that be?
So I'm going to speak from the top of my mind. I know we have on a year close to 110, 120 loads, 110, 120,000 loads at the landfill. So I will say this is probably 5%. And again, is from the top of my head. I will need to go there. It all goes about resources as well. We only have one staff that is dedicated for this, right? So what he does is he called the scale house and he asked, okay, the next load, send it my way. We're going to inspect that load. When he's done, he documents everything, then the next load is going to come to him. So if we want to ramp that up, then more staff is needed. We believe, based on what we see on the face, that the strategy has been very effective. So there hasn't been a need to increase the number of inspections that we do.
Okay, thank you. That was going to be my question around that was costs for extra staffing, extra inspections. Would that be outweighed by the surcharges we would receive? Because it'd be nice to catch more. But I'm sure you're crunching those numbers. A final question that I'll hop out, Mr. Chair, and let somebody else ask, but I have a couple more questions after this. Wondering how to phrase this delicately, are there frequent flyers that are caught fairly regularly at surcharging that we need to monitor more closely or do better education with?
I will say no, we haven't seen frequent flyers. Again, this is part of the mandatory program, so there is an economic incentive for them to do the right thing, so they pay less at the face. And also we need to remember that these are the haulers, the ones that are paying for this surcharge. It's not the generator, where the next program that we are implementing, which is the mandatory recycling, that goes back to the generator. So then the businesses, they will need to have a program in place in order to divert the material from the source. So we believe it's a more effective program as the next step.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I've got some more questions, but I'll hop out. Thank you.
City Manager.
So I just wanted to highlight something that I had to make sure that it was understood. And that Joel and I had a meeting, I think it was about a week ago, with the Construction Association, and there's some really positive outcomes here that I see as successes in city working as partners with industry. And yeah, there's been some great successes, Lethbridge Construction Association and the C&D sector and some of the results. So I just wanted to make sure that that was understood and highlighted, as there's some really positive outcomes here, and it speaks to some of the successes that Felipe touched on.
Rarely. Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much. And not so much a question. We're coming to, I think, our 3-year anniversary of the MRF being open, and all I've heard is lots of good things. And I want to take a point just to thank Steve Rossi back there. Steve, raise your hand up there. Steve has been overseeing the MRF, and I know it takes you and a great team to put this together, including Joel and everyone else. And Felipe, welcome to the city as well. But all the people I've talked to who've gone out there, I think it's just amazing how you can pull into each station, back your vehicle up, and the paints, the wood, all that kind of stuff. It's a nice place to visit. Not everyone likes to go to the landfill. even though it's a little farther away. But anyway, but I just want to say, Steve, you've done a great job out there. I've heard lots of great things, and your team, there's lots of compliments to your team. So I just wanted to let that be noted, because sometimes people forget about the people that run it out there. Thank you.
Councillor Carlson, do you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, if I can, around the success stories. And I'm glad you highlight those. It's always nice to see those. Using the glass in our, I think it was the asphalt pathways. Do you know how much of the stored glass that we had on site or in our stores we were able to utilize through this?
If I'm not wrong, 215 tons.
And as a percentage of what we have collected or still in storage?
Yes, I can answer that question. So we have probably used, I will say, close to 30% or 35% of the glass that we have accumulated. Again, this METI Trail project was the first one that we have done. It was kind of a pilot. We worked with a private consultant that helped us to develop all the specifications, talk to other municipalities. And the intent is to now, moving forward, to use the rest of the material at the site. A quick comment, though, is that on a yearly basis, it took us probably, I will say, close to 7-8 years to accumulate the amount of glass that we have. So if we do 2 more pathways, we're going to be out of that material. So again, it's good news. We're using all the material that we are getting at the stations. But it's something that we also want to communicate to other communities that are struggling to find an end market. In the past, we used to ship the glass somewhere, I think it was Seattle in some places, and we did a trial, and it's way more expensive, and also it's not to mention all the greenhouse gas implications of shipping materials down the road. Now we can use it locally.
That's a really good news story, Mr. Sanchez. Appreciate that. Final question on that through you, Mr. Chair, to either Mr. Sanchez or City Manager. If we're replacing 15% of what we used to use in the pathways, are we seeing a cost benefit to the city on being able to use glass instead of, I guess, asphalt or whatever other filler would be used, or is it just cost neutral?
I will say it's more cost neutral. Again, there is a cost to receive the glass, then hold that glass to the side, and then do the processing in order to meet the specs that we need. And at the end of the day, the benefit that we see on these initiatives, the environmental benefit. Glass is inert. In the past, it used to go 20 years ago to the landfill. We are now being able to divert this material from the landfill and use it in different areas. This case was a pathway, but I know there are other opportunities where we can even use this on the road. We still need to do some more testing to get there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, both. No further questions, I guess. Can I get a mover for the following motion? Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council receive for information the Industrial, Commercial, and Institutional ICI and Construction and Demolition C&D Sectors Waste Diversion Implementation Strategy 2021 Annual Report. Councillor Middleton Hope, all in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We're going to move to item 4.5 in the agenda, Curbside Organics Program Update. Welcome back, Joel. Waste and Recycling to provide a presentation. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of Civic Works SPC. Thanks again for having me for the third time today here. I promise this is the last presentation we do for today. So today we're going to be talking about the curbside organics program update that Council approved in 2021. Next slide, please. I want to start this presentation acknowledging the team, and I'm really happy that Councilor Parker mentioned some of the staff members that we have here today, because everything that you see here today, everything that you saw from the sustainability side and the ICI and CND, it couldn't have been done without my team. I want to acknowledge everybody that works in the waste and recycling utility, not only from the different areas, but also from the front staff that is day-to-day providing the services to the community. In this particular project, the team that we have is in front of you on the slide. We have Steve Rossi, who is sitting on the back here. He's going to be overseeing the facility operations for the compost. Leslie Burke, she will be overseeing the outreach and education. This is, I will say, one of the most important parts in all the work that we do is how we communicate with residents, how we educate and transmit that message, and that also include doing tours at the schools. James Nichols is also sitting here on the back. James is in charge of all the operations. So that's the day-to-day. They are facing customers every single day of the week, either on the residential side, the single-family, multifamily, or the commercial side. And we also have Alison Rax, which I believe is online, Lisa Nast, and Bill McMillan. They are the people that are doing all the analysis and all the data. Every time we have a transaction that goes to the Waste and Recycling Center, they are the ones that help us to make informed decisions for the project. Next slide. So we're looking now in different groups, as I mentioned before. The facility design and construction has been led by myself, but I do have a team working with us in order to make this possible. Steve Rossi, who I mentioned before, Bill McMillan is the engineer that helped us. Tetra Tech is the consultant together with Maple Grinders and Engineering Compost Systems. Those are the companies that are helping us in order to do the design and construction of the facility. Next slide. Overall, to date, what we have completed is the design of the facility. We also have done a partnership session with all the different parties in order to make sure everybody's on the same page and we achieve the goals that we have for this particular project, which is to be on time and on budget. And the construction started in February of this year. The next step for this particular area is the install of all the equipment that has now been delivered to the site, and we're working on the underground and the building erection. Next slide. This is just an overview of the compost facility. You see we have the building, have two distinct tipping areas. The north one, or the one on the north of the slide, is the residential tipping fee, and the one on the south is for the ICI sector. So this facility has a total tonnage of 20,000 tons and is able to service both sectors. To the left of the image, you see there the bunkers. That's actually where the composting process is going to happen. Next slide, please. So the milestones will be, we awarded the construction to Maple Grinders in November 2021, currently working in the construction, and we plan to have by November of this year the equipment and the building all finished. The commissioning is going to happen between November and December of 2022. Next slide. Now I'm moving into the operations of the compost facility. As I mentioned before, Steve Rossi is leading this area, and he has the coordinator, Eric Ferguson, and ECS, which is the equipment supplier, part of the project team. Next slide. On the operation side, so far what we did is we have finished the RFP, the procurement for phase 1 processing. So there was an RFP that was published, and we hired an external company to provide the services for processing for the first year. So phase 1 is starting in a few months, And the intent is to have this private contractor providing the processing in the meantime while we get the facility finished. Next slide. If we talk about the outreach and education, Leslie Burke will be leading this, and Leslie's working with her team and corporate communications, Tara Grindle, Megan Williams as well, Kathy from 311. They are the part of the bond in order to make sure that we communicate to the residents all the details about the program. Next slide. To date, what we have completed here is all the information package for phase 1 and all the details in terms of the communication and outreach has been completed. And we are moving forward now in order to do engagements with phase 1's residents in order to gather feedback about the program. Next step, and next slide. User guide, as I mentioned, has been completed. So if we move to the next slide, you are going to be able to see the operations team that is going to be delivering the curbside collection of the beans. James Nichols is sitting on the back. He's leading this area. He's the operations manager. And he's working with his operation group, which is Lisa Nass, Kevin Saxon, Jeff Madden, all the operational staff, drivers, and different technicians that we have. And we also have Mike McTavish from the asset management helping us on this area. Next slide. On the operation side, so far we have completed the procurement of the carts. The organic trucks have been procured. And I want to make a stop here. It's really important that we did this procurement back in October of 2021. Since these trucks, right now, they have a delivery time somewhere between 16 to 24 months. So the delivery time for the trucks is getting extended, but we did the procurement last year and we expect to have them by the end of this year. Routing for phase 1 is completed and letters are being mailed for residents next week to notify them. Next slide. When we look at phase 1, how did we define which areas were going to be part of phase 1? We look at the data on the tonnage for the whole city and look for areas that have diversity in terms of housing and community members. We also were looking for some areas where we have some challenges on the collection side, age of the population of those areas that we selected. And we wanted to make sure we also pick areas that were somehow affected by wind and other conditions that we know are a challenge. Next slide. So after the analysis completed, we selected Varsity Village as one of the areas that will be included in phase 1. And the next area that will be included, next slide, is Hardyville and Legacy Ridge on the north side. So as I mentioned before, letters are being sent to the residents in this area next week, and that will have all the details about the phase 1 implementation. Next slide. In terms of the collections, an update that we want to do with City Council is that the car that has been selected for the program is the 240 liters. There will be some gravity locks or some other mechanism in order to prevent the lid from opening and the material to go outside of the cart. And that testing will be happening in some of the households that are part of phase 1. Phase 1 will also have 2,000 homes included in the 3 areas that I mentioned before. In addition, it's important to mention that collection for the green card will be happening weekly during the summer month, so from May to October, and it will go to a bi-weekly collection in November to April. Next slide. Here we want to give an update or a little bit of a preview of the materials that are included into the green card for phase 1. The idea is that these materials are going to be tested, and after the implementation, we might need to do adjustments before we go citywide. Next slide, please. On this one here, we have the materials that are not going to be included into the green card. Something we want to mention that is important to highlight is that plastic bags or any compostable bags are not going to be included into the green card program. And the main rationale of this decision is after consultation with all the communities that they have a green card program in place, they are actually removing this material from the green card. The time that takes to a compostable bag or a biodegradable bag to decompose and to go into small pieces is way too long, and it doesn't match. So other communities are having this issue, and the recommendation that we receive from most of them is now that you're starting the program, make sure you don't have any plastic bags or compostable bags included. Next slide. So my last slide here is to give you the next steps. Phase 2, once we finish phase 1 for the curbside organics, phase 2 will start in the spring of 2023, and this will be the citywide implementation of the program. As mentioned before, weekly collection will happen through May to October and bi-weekly during the winter month. It's important also to highlight that there won't be any changes to the garbage and the recycling carts. Collection for the black and the blue will remain bi-weekly as it is right now. And the diversion of the organics material from the black cart will allow us to, after we implement the green card, to do any more changes to the black card. For example, we have talked in the past about a paid or pay as you throw. Once the green card is implemented, there is an opportunity to start adding those differential fees for the size of the card. And finally, phase 3. Phase 3 will be for the multifamily properties. So all the multifamily properties are going to be implemented after the citywide or the residential implementation. So most likely it's going to be for the fall of 2023. Next slide. And that's it. More than happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Are there any questions of Mr. Sanchez from the committee? Oh, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Is this presentation being presented because of a resolution that Councillor Dodick had, or is this something completely different? Because I was just talking to my colleague to the right here. Is this something completely different?
It is something completely different. So when Council approved the Green Card program and even the Blue Card program, there was a request for administration to come back and do regularly updates. So we're going to be coming to SPC in this case to do updates about the program. This is the first update since the letters going to residents in phase 1 are being sent next week. So we want to make sure we do the presentation to City Council and make sure that this was, all the details were updated.
This is completely, I was under the impression this was different, but I just want to make sure, just on the record here, this is something different than what we proposed or presented in April, am I correct?
That's correct. In April, I believe it's April 13th, we're going to come back to address the motion that Councillor Dodick passed.
Thank you very much.
We have a pre-registered guest again, speaker, Mr. Ken Eichel, if he walked in, I'm not sure. Otherwise, we'll just proceed. We're done questioning. Can I get a motion? Can I get a mover for this following motion? Who did? You're good? John? Thank you. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council receive for information the Curbside Organics Program update. Can I get a mover for that? Councillor Parker? Call the question. Good. We're going to move to 5 now, submissions. We have 5.1, snow and ice enhancement pathways along roadways. And we don't have any speakers. Oh yeah, there are staff in attendance that can answer questions for anybody that has questions from the committee. Seeing no one queued up. Cute. No questions then? Moved by Councillor Parker. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council adopt the service level enhancements for snow and ice control for pathways along roadways by moving priority 3B routes to priority 2 routes as identified in attachment 1.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Darwin and his team, Mr. Jewell and his team, for listening to what the community, what council's been kind of concerned about. But it's an enhancement in services, and which can fit within the budget, from what I can see in this report here. So it's a good news story, but of course it can't take place until council ratifies it. And so I'm asking for this committee to recommend that council ratify it. So if there's no other further debate, I just want to thank Mr. Jewell for the presentation and his team as well. Otherwise, I'd call the question.
Favor? Opposed? None. Moving then to 5.2, Streets Bylaw Amendment for Micro-Mobility Service Pilot. Staff again is in attendance and can answer any questions of the committee. Questions? Moved by Councillor Parker. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommends Council provide all 3 readings to Bylaw 6355, Street Bylaw Amendment, at their meeting of March 22nd, 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to add some context here, when I read this over, and all that, Adam, you're probably speaking to if I do have any questions. This is regards to the scooters and all that. Am I correct? So we had a presentation, if not a year and a half ago, in regards to kind of mobility and idea, but for that to occur, we need to make some changes within our bylaw, and that's why we are recommending it. Am I correct that? Just by the people that are online, Adam is nodding his head up and down very much, so just so you know. So it's perfect. I just asked for this committee support, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any other questions.
I have a question, yes. Does this contemplate the new, I'm not quite sure what they're called, but these new scooters that are popping up in the city that are in several other cities as well, or are we talking about a mobility access scooter?
I think these are the ones you would see in other communities, like kind of these eco kind of scooters that can travel along, and so there has to be some changes. And you see them in Calgary, you see them in our bigger cities, and I do believe there's no cost to the city when this does get brought forward. This would be a private vendor bringing this idea forward, so we just need to make some adjustments to our transportation bylaws and regulations in place for this to occur.
All right, thank you. We can move on to item 6.
Well, first of all, we need to vote on that one, Mr. Chairman, so I'd ask for this committee's support in presenting this to council for all 3 readings. I'll call the question. Question's been called. All those in favor?
Now we can move to item 6.1, Infrastructure Services Update, FOIP, Section 18 and Section 24. Moved by Councillor Parker. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed meeting discussions with respect to the Infrastructure Services Update remain confidential pursuant to Sections 18, harmful to individual or public safety, and Section 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection and Privacy Act. Further, be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee refer this matter to the March 8th, 2022 closed meeting of City Council.
Call the question.
Opposed? None. This is my favorite section of the agenda. We're going to go and adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing a good job. I know you were, this is the first time you had to chair a meeting, and so I appreciate your preparation, and you did a good job, so thank you. Good job.